What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today we are doing a video that was somewhat requested by you all in the comments of the 5 more rules to steal for your D&D game, where I plundered other systems and brought cool stuff over to use for D&D. And the one that I'm talking about today is from Dungeon Worlds, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and specifically their fronts system. Now, if you all watched that video, you will know that I gushed about how much I enjoyed the fronts system as presented in the Dungeon Worlds core rulebook, and I wanted to take time to do a bit of a deeper dive because I couldn't get as deep into how fronts work in that video since it was just high level about it. So we're going to get into fronts, how to use them specifically for D&D. If you're here to learn about fronts to use for Dungeon World, this could work. I'm going to leave some aspects from the core rulebook out because I don't play Dungeon World. I just saw the fronts thing and thought it was really cool. So let's get into it. First off, what are fronts? So fronts aren't really a mechanical thing at all, really. They're more just a quality of life thing for dungeon masters out there to keep track of what's going on in your campaign. So essentially there are 2 different kinds of fronts, campaign fronts and adventure fronts. And those really speak to the scope. So a campaign front is going to speak to a story or arc that you anticipate taking a whole campaign, or at least a large chunk of the campaign. Whereas an adventure front is something that's going to take 1 to a handful of sessions. So that's very much more of an adventure scope versus the whole campaign. So that's the first thing, is when you're creating a front, you want to create your campaign front when you're planning out your campaign to a certain extent. And then for adventure fronts, you're doing that when you're in the adventure planning phase and coming up with what the party is going to be doing for the next few sessions. And so adventure fronts kind of tie together to become your campaign front. And so you'll be referencing your campaign front and bringing that stuff into your adventures when you're creating them. And so we're going to get into like the actual step-by-step of how to do this a little bit further into the video. I just want to go through kind of defining what all the different parts of a front is. So when you're creating fronts, and I'm going to speak in terms of adventure fronts for most of this video, just because that's much easier to create something. A campaign front, you're creating something that encompasses your whole game, whereas an adventure, we're essentially planning an adventure, a series of sessions that are going to have a beginning, middle, and end and culminate in something. So when you're creating a front, you want to identify 2 to 3 dangers that exist within that front. So dangers, they are forces that are at work that can have an impact on the front. So a group of kobolds that the party is going to come across in the forest while they're on the road, that is not a danger. That is just an obstacle. That's a mob, whatever term you want to use. Dangers would be the tribe of kobolds that small group belongs to that is threatening to raid the village that you all are, the whole adventure centers around. That would be a danger, a force to be reckoned with in the confines of the adventure or the campaign. And the Dungeon World core rulebook lists 5 different types of dangers to give you just kind of a nice codified list of categories that you can pull from and kind of think about dangers in that way. And those 5 different types are ambitious organizations, planar forces, arcane enemies, horde, or cursed places. So you can see that we're not just talking about like monsters. We're talking about things that have a large effect on the world. And then once you identified your dangers and named them, they're going to have different impulses that are listed in the Dungeon Core rulebook that fit within their category. So things like to gain power, to destroy, to judge. And so it's a good way. They have further breakdowns. There's like almost 10 per each of those 5 categories. So the core rulebook gives you a lot of different subcategories to go off of. But for our purposes here, it's a little bit more fluid. But you essentially just want to identify from, like I said, a very high level, what do they want? What does this danger want? Do they want to destroy? Do they want to rule? Do they want to upset the current order? Stuff like that. And so you would just notate that in terms of the impulse. And then you would create your description and cast. So this is a good thing to do at this step, because as we move forward, you're going to be kind of breaking all of these different dangers, and you want to have 2 to 3 dangers for an adventure front. 3 to 5 for a campaign front is what it recommends, but no more than 3 for an adventure, because then things can get a little crowded, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. But then you want to write out your description and then cast of characters. So just a description of what is the adventure. Kind of when you buy the pre-made adventures from Wizards of the Coast and they have the adventure summary that's like a paragraph long at the very front of the book, something like that. Like, what's going on, what's happening, what are the adventurers trying to accomplish, that kind of thing. And then taking the time, if you know that there are major players, like the head, if your dangers are organizations, the head of those organizations, writing their name and a detail or two about them, so that you're not caught off guard in the middle of a session without a good name and you end up naming the leader of your super cool, edgy underground cult Bob, because you can't think of anything better. So yeah, taking the time to write out the character names and just 2 bullet point description. And then here is the cool part, for me anyway, of fronts. Grim Portents into impending doom. So starting off with the Grim Portents, you are essentially going to be writing out, if these dangers existed in the world and the player characters did not, what would happen? Step by step, what would they accomplish? And so the super cool, edgy cult, maybe they start kidnapping villagers and taking them back to their lair. And then they collect components for the dark ritual that they want to complete. And that's Grim Portent number 2. And then they acquire the ancient dagger of Shabalavavu that is the key to performing this ritual. And so they find that and bring it back. Then they begin the ritual as step 4, and then they complete the ritual is step 5. So those would be the Grim Portents. And the idea being that these are the steps as the player characters are distracted doing other things on the adventure, talking to NPCs that aren't important, or just going off on side tangents, or taking long rests when they don't need to be, just to try and cheese the system. This is all the stuff that's happening. There are 2 different types of Grim Portents described in the book, descriptive and prescriptive. And so descriptive are things that happen during play at the table. So let's say that the party is in a race through the temple to try and get the ancient dagger of Shabalavavu, and they are trying to get it before the kobolds can. And let's say they fail their checks and they see one of the kobolds grab it and take off in a little tunnel and scurry away, and they failed their checks. They failed the skill challenge to get to the dagger first. That is a descriptive one. It has happened in real time during play. Conversely, prescriptive are things that happen off screen that are a result of, let's say that the village is under siege and some like evil force is attacking, and there's the rituals happening, but the kobolds have sent people in force out to provide a distraction to keep the adventurers from getting to the ritual. And so they fought their way through like 2 or 3 encounters, and they know the ritual is happening. They need to run because, the 4th one has been ticked off, and so the only thing left is to complete the ritual. And they decide, oh, I'm pretty low on hit points. Maybe we should take a short rest. Yeah, I think that would be smart. It's clear that we're coming to the big end of the adventure encounter. Probably be smart to take a short rest here. And you, as the dungeon master, like, short rest is an hour, and they're doing the ritual right now. Yeah, but Warlock needs his spell slots back, so I'm going to take a short rest. It's just like, okay, ritual complete. And so that is the idea with a prescriptive Grim Portent that happens off screen due to the decisions and the actions and the agency of the player. You're not taking away their agency, you are responding to their agency and their decisions. And before we continue on with the video, please be sure to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps a whole heck of a lot. If you're new to the channel, we've had a lot of new people coming around. Welcome to the channel. Thank you all for coming to check it out. If you want to be part of the conversation surrounding this video and all the other videos in the channel, we have a Discord link down below and a Patreon, patreon.com/thegeekpantheon. If you want to financially support the channel, you can do so over there. And then the impending doom, which is what happens if every one of those Grim Portents has a checkbox next to it. What comes to pass? Tyranny, destruction, chaos? Who knows? you know, because you've used the front system and planned all this out. And so, yeah, they failed to stop the ritual. They took that short rest. They get down to the ritual just in time to see the ancient eldritch horror rise from the earth as it looms its dominion over the kobolds that are worshiping it. And all of a sudden now they have a new super villain that they have to contend with, because, sure, I'm glad that Warlock got his 3 spell slots back. But I play a Warlock in my campaign, so that is self-criticism more than anything else. Kyber shards here on the channel. Bing. And then another very important part of fronts is stakes. So these are things that you are relinquishing control of as the dungeon master. You are saying, these are the stakes of the adventure or campaign that I'm leaving on the table. These things can relate to the larger world. They can relate to player characters or even NPCs. And they are literally questions that you write out. So with the kobold cult ritual with the dagger and all that stuff, let's say that you have a kobold party member. Let's say this is like a late game campaign and they have family that are members of this tribe / cult. One of the stakes you can write down is, how will this PC reconcile the love for their family with their actions? And that is just something that you can do. Or if you want it to be something that is more on your side of the fence, you can say, how will the PC's mom reconcile her feelings for her greater goals? And then you leave it up to the player character to roll a persuasion check or intimidation or charm, or, well, no, that's persuasion. You get what I'm saying, though. You leave it up to the player to, through their actions and role play and rolling, determine that outcome. And so those are just things that normally you might keep within your purview as the DM, that you are allowing the dice to determine, or the actions of the players to determine, which I think is really nice. I like that you are writing down and codifying things to remind yourself, like, these things I am no longer in control of. Like, I am giving these things up for the sake of the story and the sake of player agency. And then you get it on the table and you resolve the front and you let the adventure play out and you check off the grim portents as they happen. And you ultimately see, do they stop the danger from accomplishing its goals or coming to fruition and save the day? Or are there certain elements that escaped? Maybe they stopped the grim portents early and there were some elements that were still out there that now can be transferred over to another adventure front. Or perhaps the danger succeeded and something big has now been introduced into the world. The aberrant horror has been unleashed, and now you can take that and move it to your campaign front, because it is a much larger threat now that will encompass the rest of your campaign. And the other really cool thing is you can have multiple adventure fronts going at once. Like, you plan out for an adventure, and we're going to kind of do that when I get into the actually putting it into practice. I wrote out a front, 2 fronts, in fact, so that I can show you all how it works. But Dungeon World Core Rulebook specifically says multiple adventure fronts are possible. Your players can get, sidetrack's the wrong word, they can make new discoveries that open up new adventure fronts. And then you have multiple ones, and you have multiple lists of grim portents that are happening, and the player characters have to prioritize. Okay, so we have this thing, we have the kobold ritual going on, but also this house is haunted and there are people literally dying in the village from some like insane, intense poltergeist. So maybe we have to deal with that right now because it's like murdering people, and the kobolds have to be put on the back burner. And this very much is the way that I would like to run adventure fronts, because it makes the world feel alive. It makes the world feel like it's moving. And while the players are the heroes of the story and the protagonists, they aren't always in control. And I like that. I like that feeling that you have to pick and choose your battles. And sometimes you may not be able to accomplish everything that you want to accomplish. I would, as a dungeon master, I would create a situation to where it's possible. There is a win state, but it's very hard. Like, you're going to have everything fall your way in order to accomplish everything. Now, they might prevent the full-on impending doom of all the different dangers, but there might be elements that fall through the cracks and can come back and haunt the players later. So that is multiple adventure fronts are possible and oftentimes encouraged and warranted depending on the actions of your players. So let's look at what I have come up with. So first adventure front, enemies at the gate. So the capital of Dryab, that's just the name I came up with, is under siege by the United Armies of the North. But the corrupt rulers of the city will do whatever they can to hold on to their power. So the enemies at the gate is the name of the adventure front. So the dangers, the first one is armies of the North. Their impulse is to drive their enemies before them. Just, sack, pillage. Grim portents, burn incoming food shipments, rout reinforcements, organize troops for assault, take the city. Impending doom, rampant chaos. So that is step by step what they are going to attempt to accomplish over the course of the adventure. The other danger is the governing body of the city. Impulse is to control. So their first grim portent is hoard food for nobles, conscript unwilling citizens into the guard, arrest northern citizens as spies, bribe northern generals after the city falls. So those are their grim portents. And you can see that these things happen in a singular list. So they're happening and the dangers are moving, but they're moving in a logical order. So, the armies of the North burn incoming food shipments, which leads the governing body of the city to begin hoarding food for the nobles. The armies of the North route reinforcements that are coming into the city, which causes the governing body to conscript unwilling citizens into the guard. You see how things are escalating one step at a time, and the dangers are working not in concert with each other, but in response to one another. And then I read my description at the outset, and then I have my cast of characters like Ulfin Stouthorn, the leader of the Northern armies, who is brutal but honorable. Tobias Lithin, prime minister of the city, treacherous and cowardly. You get what I'm doing here. And so that is the adventure front. I now have a situation in the city, and I can take this and now actually plan out my session. So session 1 are the characters' residents of the city. So the beginning of this is like the armies of the North marching over the horizon, or are they coming to the city? Have they heard the call for help and they managed to get through the blockade and get into the city? That stuff is for when I'm actually planning it out. This is now my guideline for when that time comes. Additionally, though, as we talked about with multiple adventure fronts, let's say while the player characters are in the city, the siege is going on. Oh no. Then they come upon a rally being held by some organization that is blaming Parliament for the siege and saying that the royal family never would have let this happen. That's odd. Like political debate in the middle of a siege? And so now we have another adventure front available, treachery under Parliament. So we have our first danger, the Abolition Crown, which is a cabal organization that wants to reinstitute the monarchy. Their impulse is to absorb power. So first grim portent, hold rally blaming woes of the city on Parliament. Pay off city guard to lighten security around Parliament House. Plant explosives underneath the Parliament House. Cause riot to force Parliament to meet. Blow up Parliament House. Impending doom, usurpation. So that's what they got going on. And then the other danger is the royal family. And I created grim portents for them in response to what's happening in the city as well. I'm not going to get into all of it, but you get what I'm saying. So the party can then discover this plot to blow up Parliament in this city in the middle of a siege. And it's clear that these people are taking advantage of the dire situation, but there's also a siege happening. And what are you all doing? And so then the party has to begin dividing their time. And then let's say we have another adventure front pop up where the party discovers a cult called the Jade Eye that has been researching about this arcane seal that's allegedly underneath the city. And I have all of their grim portents for the Jade Eye as an organization and the arcane seal, the cursed place that holds the Lich's phylactery. And if they succeed, then, the Lich will they'll possess somebody's body, and the lich's soul will go into their body and reside with them while the organization has a hold of the phylactery. And it's not necessarily somebody in the organization that's going to have the lich's soul. The lich is just going to spot the most worthy mortal nearby that she can possess. What's a party to do with all of this stuff going on in one city? And you have all this here, and you're not having to write everything out. You have the hooks for all these things. And then if early on in a session, the party sees one of the hooks and latches on, you have something to go off of in the session, which is what I like about fronts. Is once the session ends, then you can go and start plotting everything out, because it's clear that they have pivoted to this other front. But the whole time that they're investigating the Jade Eye and the Arcane Seal, the reinforcements just got routed that were coming into the city, and now the governing body is taking unwilling citizens into the army. And oh, by the way, the city guard is suspiciously like not guarding the Parliament House anymore. And yeah, like that's a living city with a lot of stuff going on, and the party has to make decisions or split the party. Let's say that on the same night, if this just, I wouldn't orchestrate this, but if things just happen to fall in the right spot to where half the party have to go to try to disrupt the ritual that's happening with the Jade Eye, and the other half of the party have to go to the Parliament Hall to try and stop the terrorists from blowing it up and like implicate the royal family as being in on this plot to kill Parliament, that would be an insane session. And like, whoa, like, and you have all this ready to go. And this took me like 45 minutes to come up with 3 adventure fronts with very clear progressive steps of like, here is what's happening in the adventure. And this is, with 3 adventure fronts, this is 6-7 sessions worth of content right here that I have the bones for, that I just need to, come up with encounters and write out like more detailed NPCs that they might encounter. And that's why I think fronts are so great, is like I have 2 pages on my legal pad that have all of this information ready to go for me. Oh, and stakes. I wrote out stakes also. Like, will Phelan, the Northern Prince, betray the city? Phelan, he's an NPC the party has met. He's a Northern Prince that came to the capital on like an exchange program thing. But now he's caught in the siege and having like, he's made friends in the city in the south. But his dad is trying to invade, and what's Phelan going to do? And who will the lich's body possess? Just leave that up to chance. Like who is there for the ritual, or who is nearby? Who is like above where the ritual is taking place? Is the party up there? Could it be a party member? That'd be wild. Who will Huxon, made up name of a PC, how will Huxon reconcile his heritage in the north with his new life in the south? Very similar to Phelan. Like, will Huxon, he'll have some feelings about the northern armies invading, and that's like his homeland. But, he doesn't think that it's right what they're doing, or does he think it's right? You don't know. You wrote it as a stake. And like, there's a princess NPC of the royal family of the city who is very, she's a person of the people. She loves the people. She doesn't like the way that the governing body is treating them. But at the same time, she doesn't agree with her royal family plotting to kill the governing family. And the PCs know her and have gotten to know her really well. And what's she going to do? How is she going to help? And so those are the stakes that you can write down. And then you just leave it up to the game, to the dice, to the whole thing that we're doing here. So that's Dungeon Fronts. I got really excited there at the end. But it's just like showing what I was able to accomplish with so little work. And like, this is a pretty well fleshed out like city with 3 different adventures going on in it. And I don't feel like it would take a whole lot of work to, get a couple of sessions out of each of these. But because they're all happening at the same time, it would be a lot of sessions going on. And so let me know what you all think down below. Do you think that this sounds interesting? If you're familiar with Dungeon World, did I butcher this? Do I not understand fronts at all? I feel like I do. I read the core rulebook entry on fronts a couple times, but let me know down below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.